Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's event of the HagueTalks, where we are going to discuss South Sudan. It's a great privilege to be here with you in the room and to see the room filled with so many people. We are greatly excited for today's event and for today's fantastic speakers who have joined us all the way from South Sudan. Three inspiring women who will tell you about their perspectives of their lives, works, interests, and hearts in South Sudan. And we are very excited to share this today with you. My name is Benjamin Nolan. I'm the Policy Officer for South Sudan with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and I will be your moderator for today. So it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers and to also later moderate the Q&A with you. We're happy to be here today at the Hague University for Applied Sciences, and also happy to see so many students of the Hague University in the room. Can I see a quick raise of hands around the room? Who of you are students of the Hague University? Okay, so this is about half. This is great to see. Great to see so many students and young people here with us today for this discussion. I'd also like to see if there's any representatives from civil society organizations or partners of the Netherlands Ministry, or maybe even employees of the Dutch Ministry. Yeah, I see a few hands there as well. It's great to see you too. And finally, I'm looking just for one or two people who do not fall in these two categories. Can I see a show of hands who does not fit in? I will quickly walk to you and ask you for your name and how you found us here today.
I'm Anna from Austria and I attend Leiden University. I would say that an email sent out.
Great, thanks very much. And I saw another hand here in the back. Is that you?
I do Leiden University as well, and I follow the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is how we celebrate that.
Fantastic. Well, great that you found us and the other people in the room as well. It's great that we have a full house. And welcome, of course, as well to all of those who are joining us today online, wherever you may be based, whatever time it may be for you. We're very happy that you took the time to join us for today's discussion. We hope that you can hear us well. And with this, I'd like to give a quick tip to the audience, especially for the people who are sitting here in the middle. The camera with the microphone for the live stream is right behind you. So if you could, especially the people who are sitting here, be mindful of the sound that you create during today's event, just so that we can ensure that everyone who's joining us from online can understand us well. And I definitely encourage online participation from all of you, whether you're sitting here or whether you are online. You can join us in today's discussion by using the hashtag HagueTalks. This is on Twitter, on Instagram, and Facebook. We encourage you circulating anything of the discussions today, engaging with us, and especially also the people who are joining us on the live stream. There is a chat box that you can use to pose any questions, and we will do our best to get some answers for you later in today's discussion. So the structure of today's event is that we have three speakers who are going to present their Hague talk to you. And they will each get 6 to 8 minutes to give their pitch on their story in South Sudan. And following the three speakers, we will then later have a moderated Q&A. So I encourage you already to think about questions you might be willing to ask to the speakers, so that when we get to the Q&A, I can come to you and we can make sure to have an active, engaged, and lively discussion. So it is my pleasure to dive into South Sudan now. As you might know, South Sudan is the newest country in the world. It's the country that gained independence in 2011, meaning it's just over 12 and a half years old. So it's the newest country in the world with the wide recognition of states. It is a country that has a population of 12 million. So this is about 2/3 of what the Dutch population has, 18 million. But at the same time, South Sudan is 15 times as big as the Netherlands is. So you can imagine how many people there are in South Sudan and how spaced they are across the country. South Sudan is a country with enormous potential, and at the same time also several challenges, several that I think you will be hearing from today from our speakers. It is a country that has massive natural resources. There is an enormous oil wealth, there is also gold, there is great lush green nature, there is a lot of forestry. There's great potential to tap into for its development. But at the same time, it also has its challenges. In the recent history for South Sudan, there's been a history of conflict with two big civil wars that have festered the country in the last 12 and a half years. And also, it's one of the countries in the world that is the most affected by climate change. The Nile, the river, runs through the country and is causing a lot of flooding, with last year affecting over 1.1 million people. And every year for the last 3 years is facing the worst floods in its 60-year history. So this really shows that climate change is already a big reality for the people in South Sudan that they're dealing with, and also a big challenge for its government and all of its international partners who are supporting the people of South Sudan to address some of these challenges. So where are we today? Today, South Sudan has just under 2 years left in its peace transition. So 2 years before the peace agreement, which forms the foundation of its government, has to be completed by election. So the first speaker of today, Ms. Sarah Nyanti, is a Liberian woman, a country in the west of Africa. She has dedicated her life to public service, first with her own government, later also with the United Nations. But aside from that, she's also an ordained minister in her home country, in a church just outside its capital, Monrovia. In her last year, she has lived in other places like Nigeria, Gambia, Yemen, Nepal, and now has the pleasure to call South Sudan her home since early last year. And today she will share with us her story on her work in South Sudan and how we can support South Sudan from emergency to development. Please give a big hand for Sarah Nyanti.
So I was whispering as he was speaking, and I was asking Grace, but how do we know all the things we do know about each other, about South Sudan? It's a global village. The world is a global village, and it's a global stage, and all of us are actors on that stage, and we all have this moment in time to play our part. And if we don't play our part, we play too well, the future will judge us. And so that's what this is about. It's about us seizing the opportunity, taking this moment in time for us to be able to dialogue around the issues in South Sudan and talk about how we can work together as a community, as a global community, to partner with the people of South Sudan in coming out of what we call has been this downward spiral in terms of growing humanitarian needs. So Benjamin has done a great job in introducing, and I would say he stole some of my lines, but he didn't steal some of my lines. We share those lines because it's the information we use collectively as partners to respond to the situation in South Sudan. So it's true. 76% of the 12 million people in South Sudan are in need of humanitarian assistance. It's true that South Sudan is placed in a situation with 3 major crises. The climate crisis. South Sudan is within the fifth, I would say the range of the 5th most impacted by climate change. South Sudan is 4th, according to data from June 2022, South Sudan is ranked 4th in terms of globally the forced displacement crisis. We have over 2 million IDPs in South Sudan, over 2.3 million refugees in neighboring countries, and South Sudan is host to refugees from Sudan as well. Our protection crisis. Between 2021 and 2022, South Sudan saw a 25% increase in conflict-related sexual violence and sexual gender-based violence overall. So a protection crisis, a climate crisis, a movement of people, forced displacement crisis, and it doesn't stop. It continues. So while we're talking about our response and trying to make things better for the people of South Sudan, it doesn't stop. The crisis continues. So last year, and when I'm talking about the issue of instability or insecurity in South Sudan, I want to give you a picture. Last year, South Sudan was the country where we had 75% of the people in need of humanitarian assistance. This year it's gone up to 76%. Last year, South Sudan had the record, unfortunately, of being the worst place in the world to be humanitarian. We had 9 humanitarian deaths. We had hundreds of violent attacks against humanitarians. And also, last year, we saw that increase in the violence against women and girls in terms of not only conflict-related sexual violence, but in terms of how women every day have to face violent acts, just in terms of accessing their rights. January 2023, we stand here now already. Today is the 16th of January, we have had 3 humanitarian deaths in South Sudan. Not a great way to start the year. Now I speak as humanitarian coordinator to say very bad start for humanitarian actors, but it's nothing compared to what the people of South Sudan face. Every day, women and girls must make really heartbreaking choices as to whether or not to access latrine for natural body movement or risk being raped. Now, I entered this building, I chose to go to the restroom before coming in here. Easy choice to make. That's a very difficult choice for women and girls in South Sudan today. Very difficult choice. When discussing with a man, a particular man said it's better for his wife to be raped than for him to be killed. Reality. In South Sudan today, women and girls find it very difficult to access any type of service, and especially when it's linked to justice. Access to justice becomes even particularly harder than accessing other services like water, sanitation, and hygiene. If a woman has been raped or a girl has been raped and she chooses, the slim chance that she chooses to report, because ordinarily she may not want to report because of all the social cultural norms around that. If she chooses to report, the chances are high that the person she reports to is a man. The chances are high that the person who analyzes that information is a man. The chances are higher that the person who will represent her is a man. And it's most likely that the person who will hear the case, if it ever reaches there, is a man. Very difficult to be a woman or a girl in South Sudan today. I spoke with a young lady in Malakal POC, and her mother was telling me that she goes to school from the protection of civilian site into Malakal town. And I asked them about the challenges around accessing education. And the young lady spoke to me and said, I just really want to learn, so I take the risk every day. Under the sound of my voice, to you in this room and those listening online, it's no risk in general to get up and go to school. But it's a risk for a South Sudanese girl. Why are we here today? We're here today because as much as we have collectively been working in South Sudan to make things better, things have not gotten better. That's the reality. They haven't gotten better. We continue to have increasing humanitarian needs, but we also continue to face decreasing availability of resources for so many reasons, including the current war in Russia and Ukraine. At the end of the day, nothing's standing still. South Sudanese women and girls are facing climate shocks. There's flooding, there's drought. They're facing climatic shocks. At the same time, they're facing the effects of violence, episodic violence, tensions, ethnic tensions, tribal tensions. They're forced to run, they're forced to flee. And where do they flee to? I visited Canal PG, one of the areas that's very difficult to reach. I went there. And when I got to Canal PG, when I got to that area, I thought the story I was hearing, honestly, if I wasn't there in person, I would have thought it was made up. But I saw the pictures. I met the people. And we had families that slept outside in the flooded area where some water had receded. They slept outside because snakes were inside the house seeking dry ground. I would have thought this was a fairy tale, something made for Netflix. But this is real life. It's not drama. It's not a fairy tale. It's a horror film. The reality for women and girls in South Sudan is that if we don't take action, if we don't continue to take concerted action, as peace actors, as humanitarian actors, and development actors, nothing will change for them. But most importantly, it's not about where those individual actions are taken, it's how all of them come together to do business unusual, to do things differently for the people of South Sudan. What we are looking at now as leaders And for me as the leader on the humanitarian file, for me as the leader on the UN development system, and the deputy in the peacekeeping mission, is how we come together overall as an international community, not only us within the UN, but the member states, the NGOs, INGOs, and local NGOs, how we all come together to look at where we can act together in a way that's different, that's based on local solutions, that's in partnership with the people of South Sudan, to find durable solutions for the issues that we're confronting. So it's about how we program for peace, humanitarian development nexus. You hear a lot about that nexus in our world, but oftentimes it's just words. This time around is action, concrete action, looking at areas where it's possible, where we can address climate mitigation and action, climate adaptation, looking at where communities can start to farm where they didn't farm before, looking at communities that used to farm other agricultural products, so start looking at rice that's so favorable to the flooded areas, looking at how they can adjust themselves. The good thing is that South Sudan has land, lots of land, and so adaptation is possible. The second area we're looking at is food security and livelihoods. How do we now start to build on the fact that South Sudanese in 2021 themselves produced the larger proportion of the cereal that was needed for South Sudan? How do we build on that? How do we partner with local farmers to increase their yield with climate-smart approaches to agriculture, increase their yield, purchase from them locally, and use the locally purchased food to increase their livelihood and their economic viability, economic diversification, and then also use that food to feed those who are most in need of food. And lastly, giving dignity to people who are living in camps and trying to transition some of those camps to communities, to neighborhoods. The reality is that with things shifting, some people will never go back to what they used to call home. The face of insecurity and instability in South Sudan is chaos. The face of instability and insecurity in South Sudan is hopelessness on the face of a child. The face of instability and insecurity in South Sudan is a woman saying, I can't do anything for my children. So I asked some women in Malakal, what does peace look like for you? If we're to have peace tomorrow, and we've signed the peace agreement, the roadmap has been signed by the country, extending the peace, the agreement, the current peace agreement to 2025. That's a document that's signed by the political actors, but asking the people who truly matter, what does peace look like for you? A wide range of answers, and I've asked that question in so many places to so many different groups of women. I can tell you that in one of the spaces where I asked that question, one woman just broke down crying. She said because she couldn't picture peace. She couldn't imagine what peace looked like. Because all she's known is war since her childhood. Another woman said to me, peace means that my daughter can go to school. Another woman said to me, peace means I can go home. I can live in my house and not beg for food. I don't want to beg for food. I want to grow my own food. I want my dignity. And that's what this is about. It's about how we come together as an international community, all actors, including the academic world, including all of the researchers and so forth. How do we all come together to bring all of our skill sets and our talents to bear for the people of South Sudan, the forgotten crisis? They can be forgotten in the international media. I can't forget them. Because I've been to Bor, I've been to Wa, I've been to Torik, I've been to Abyei, where nobody goes. I've been to Canal, PG, I've been to places that people have forgotten about. So I can't forget them because I see them at night. I see their faces. I see the little boy separated from his family, having walking for 5 days without food. I see the one who lost herself to a snake bite. I see them. And tonight is about you seeing them. It's about you seeing them through our eyes. It's about you understanding that although international media has not been singing the song of South Sudan, we don't want a song sung. We want a script written. But it's a different script. A script of collective action that will have tangible impact on the lives of the people we're there to serve, especially the women and girls. It's not about peace tomorrow. It's about peace today. Because peace tomorrow is too late for South Sudan. It's about peace today. And about holding the government accountable for peace. And making sure that the peace agreement is translated into concrete words that mean something at the community level, at the household level, at the state level. It's not about a national agreement that's placed on websites and we talk about monitoring the benchmarks. It's about the daily benchmark of, do I have food to eat? Do I have a place to sleep? Can my children drink clean water? Have I been forgotten? Thank you.
You join us today, of course, as the UN resident and humanitarian coordinator in South Sudan, but you are also a woman in South Sudan. And I can imagine that a lot of the stories you've just been sharing with us, they also touch you personally. And for a lot of people in the room, some of these experiences are probably very foreign. I was wondering if you could maybe share with us briefly how that touches you and how you deal with that, working in a context like South Sudan.
South Sudan is personal for me. It's personal because I went to school with South Sudanese. I interacted with South Sudanese in Liberia. Between 1955 and 1972, I was still a baby at the time. Parts of it I wasn't even born yet. But Liberia was host to many South Sudanese students during their war, during one of the wars. And so many of the South Sudanese ministers today and some of their relatives went to school in Liberia. So that's one part of it. So South Sudan has a link with Liberia. The second part of it is that Liberia has gone through civil crisis. Liberia has had its share of war and of pain. And I happened to live through the last set of wars. And I lived through the part where it was the last set that led to the ushering of the transitional government and then for our elections where we elected the first female president in Africa. But in that last set of wars, I was an IDP. I had to leave my home, a decent home, where I had food to eat every day, and overnight I didn't have shelter. I was taken in by a relative. I had cash, but cash meant nothing. I couldn't buy anything, there was nothing to buy. And that's when you realize that money is just paper at certain points in time. So when we talk about money, it's a whole different conversation. But I saw mortar shells dropping on the house next to me. There was a night where we were 72 in a small room, knee to chest. And in order for you to stretch out your legs, the person next to you had to pull their knees to their chest to alternate. We lived through that night, mortar shells dropping, and I can always hear the sound in my ears. And that's how it would garnish the roof of the house that it dropped on. It dropped on the house next to us. I've seen children with pieces of mortar shells in their neck and buttocks. I carried mortar shells in my purse for many years because I said I didn't want to forget. Working for the people of South Sudan is not a job for me. It's purpose. It's about the reality that we wouldn't be where we are today as a people if people didn't step in. If the international community had not stepped in, ECOWAS in the UN, I don't know where Liberia would be today. We have a responsibility as a global community to make sure that we end these senseless wars and to make sure that we hold people accountable for these wars and the suffering that it causes for generations. I don't want the children of South Sudan to continue to grow up from generation to generation only knowing war. Because when you only know war, your solutions are warlike. You fight when nobody's fighting you. You fight in your offices, you fight in your families, and it's just not the future of the world that we need. And it's the youngest republic. And we always want the youngest republic to have a better start. And if it was a false start, let's press restart. But let's do business unusual. Thank you.
Let's do business unusual. I think that's a great quote to end it with. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure people are eager to engage with you later during the Q&A. Thank you so much. We'll be seeing you next time. In the international development world, we often say nothing about us without us. And for that reason, I'm especially pleased that we're not only talking about South Sudan today, but we are also hearing from a South Sudanese young woman. We are hearing from a young South Sudanese youth and gender activist who herself was born as a refugee due to the ongoing war in South Sudan and mentions that to be her primary motivator and intent. Please give a big hand for Grace and Luca. Thank you.
Almost every young person from South Sudan has the same story. They were either born a refugee or had to flee at a very young age to a neighboring country to seek refuge. My story is not any different. I was born in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, where my parents, my grandparents, and my extended family were seeking refuge at the time. I was lucky enough that I could leave the camp and seek education outside in the city in Kenya. Something that not every other child who was seeking refuge was lucky enough to get. But the worst part is I knew nothing about South Sudan except what I heard, the war stories, the horror that most of my family experienced during the time. I witnessed the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005 on TV. I witnessed the death of Dr. John Garang, the leader of the Sudan People Liberation Movement online. I saw South Sudan gaining its independence in 2011 and the genocide in 2013 all on TV. But when I finally moved to South Sudan in 2016, I was unlucky enough to experience it firsthand during the armed clashes that happened next door to me. And for me, that taught me a lot. What is there hope for South Sudan? Today, some would say maybe Juba as a city is not experiencing armed conflict, but we can all agree that the absence of violence is not peace. Peace is when you can solve conflict in a peaceful way. We know that with the signing of the peace agreement, I would call it a ticking bomb. Anytime the two warring parties would have a conflict, it would always end the same way, with South Sudanese suffering and experiencing war again. I worked at an NGO, and in one of our programs, we were working with women in peace and security and gender-based violence. And our program was developed to train women on their basic rights, their legal frameworks that support them against harmful traditional practices that happen against women in the communities. And this woman, I guess, tired of hearing how much rights she has, stands up and says, I know my rights, I know I deserve to not experience violence, I know I deserve to live a better life, and I believe in this belief system that women do have rights against violence. But how then do I leave a family with my children when I cannot support myself economically? How do I leave a partner who provides at least a breadwinner to my children? I have no education background, no source of income, no work employment, and even culturally I cannot leave marriage without being shamed in the community. And we have to change our strategies, because how then do we empower victims of gender-based violence without ensuring that they can have a support system that allows them to leave such abusive relationships, that allows them to leave communities that do not allow them to stay away from violence? And our program shifted from not only trainings on human rights and basic legal frameworks to support women, but providing support system economic-wise, with business and management opportunities and a small grant at the end of the program that allows these women to start businesses in their villages, to open up shops, baking and tailoring. And we noticed a shift in how these women were taken back into the community. Now that they were breadwinners and supported their families economically, they had a voice. They had a voice to speak against conflict. Even those women who could provide economically faced less violence from their partners in the time. Today I work with young people and I apply the same thing. The reality of young people in South Sudan is high rates of unemployment, inaccessibility to healthcare, education, crime rates on the rise, and even traditions that were non-violent at the time are now becoming more and more violent. cattle raiding leading to so many deaths at the time. We look at young people and peace-building initiatives that lack economic stability, that lack economic forms of independence to be unsustainable. Because peace and economic stability are one-on-one. They're interconnected. If you lose one, you lose the other. And today I stand here not with all the answers, but to speak about my reality. I think the speakers mentioned how much resources South Sudan has. We not only have 70% of its population below the age of 35, we have the growing river Nile where fish die of old age, we have gold and minerals and aluminium and iron, but at the same time we depend fully on our oil and petroleum industry, which is of course all run by foreign investment, leaving 85% of the labor market without employment. How then do we expect this community that cannot afford to live and afford their living standards and basic needs to be peaceful? I would say, we have a saying, a hungry man is an angry man. So the mistake we make as humanitarian workers is we look to solve emergency issues. We look to provide food today, but in the Bible we say, providing a seed is better than fruit. And today, when we develop programs on humanitarian assistance towards South Sudan, South Sudanese are not asking for solutions for today. South Sudanese are asking for solutions that are sustainable, that they can wake up tomorrow and know where the next meal is coming from. Programs that enable them to stand on their own ground, because to be honest, South Sudanese are tired of the violence. We've been through too much wars, we've lost too many things, and the normal South Sudanese will not fight another war, except a war that allows them, or they think, allows them to feed themselves. Crime rates and violence against women all fall under the economic instability that each and every one of us face. So today when developing program for South Sudan, it's not only on peace building and conflict resolution, but on ensuring that economic stability and the next South Sudanese knows where the next meal is coming from, where the child is going to get an education or healthcare, and if at all they can be peaceful by themselves, because I believe that peace of mind is peace of heart, or is it the other way around? And I think I felt a huge responsibility to stand up here and speak such a broad topic. But if I had a message to say is, we want to stand on our own. We do not want to depend on humanitarian aid all the time, as we have for all the years we've had independence until now. So my message for today is on SDG 16, Sustainable Development Goal 16, on peace, justice, and stronger institutions. Peace and sustainable peace efforts are not possible without coupling efforts towards reconciliation, arbitration, and justice with economic stability through systems that are developed with us. So working with humanitarian aid to develop systems that allow South Sudanese to grow economically and independently. Thank you.
Thank you very so much. I think it's so great to hear from you today as a young South Sudanese woman, and also especially looking around the room, seeing so many young people. I'm sure it's great for them to see a face that they can recognize that speaks to them. What I'm wondering, what I'd like to ask you is, we're discussing South Sudan today in the Netherlands, and I know you visited the Netherlands multiple times because you're a member of the Youth Advisory Council of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But how do you feel? What is it like for you to have a discussion on your country so far away removed from home, and to hear other people talk about a country that is yours from history?
I think for me it shows, apart from it being very challenging to myself as South Sudanese, I don't think we're proud of hearing when every time someone speaks about South Sudan, it's either war or violence or poverty. But I think it's only not only challenges us to do solutions that are for ourselves, but shows that we have a support system that allows us to hear from the real South Sudanese, not the politicians, but often the voices of the citizen. In Swahili we say the common mwananchi, the common citizen of South Sudan, is often not heard. So I feel it's a good space for me to speak up and a big responsibility in my hand to speak for a generation of young people of a young country that just wants to be heard and has had enough of it.
Well, you've done that so gracefully. Thank you, Grace. Peace, justice, and stronger institutions. We'll be sure to hear more from you later. Thanks so much for your time. And now it's my pleasure to welcome the final speaker today to the stage. Before we go over to the Q&A, I encourage you once more to think of your questions. For the people online, to drop your questions in the chat box while we move towards our last speaker. Our last speaker is a Dutch diplomat, the ambassador of the Netherlands to South Sudan, with over 29 years of foreign service in her experience. She is originally from Friesland, in north of the Netherlands, but now calls South Sudan her home. She, in her motivation, says that she feels the responsibility to use the role that she has to amplify the voice of other people. And in that, we are very curious to hear from her about her vision for justice, peace, and the future of South Sudan. Ambassador Marielle Schippers, thank you so much.
Thank you. 28th of August last year, just days after I presented my credentials to President Kiir, Sarah invites me to join the UN mission to Malakal, Upper Nile. After an almost idyllic boat trip, we reach the refugee camp, the IDP camp of Abidjan. It was just 2 weeks after heavy fighting broke out in Tonga, and the UN had set up so quickly and wonderfully a camp where the people came that walked for miles and for days. We talked to the women, and Sarah sits down, and we hear their terrible stories. And you just heard some examples. And we ask, like, do we have shelter? Do we have food? Do we have some care? And the women say, yes, thank you, we're really grateful. We could use some more plastics maybe because there's heavy rain, but yeah, it's good. And then one woman stands up. And she says, you know, thank you for the shelter, but I can't sleep. And thank you for the food, but I can't eat. I'm so scared. I just don't feel safe. And I think, that's weird. Good camp, the UN is there. Even some Dutch NGOs I met that cater for the mental well-being. 1.5 weeks later, the camp was attacked. People had to flee again, and many of them got drowned in an idyllic river. And I learned from that. I learned that we have to listen. That we really have to listen. And I also learned that I have an obligation to tell her story in Juba. Tell it in Juba. It's slightly over a year ago, I got a nice phone call from my ministry, and they said, congratulations, it's Juba. So it was the only posting outside of Europe that I had put on the list. And then, well, we have our foreign service, we have now a very modern diplomacy, saying that if you're a first-time investor, you try an easy post outside of Europe, and if you do well, you can get a more difficult posting in Europe. No, I'm just kidding a bit. I was really pleased to be posted in Juba. I was in Mali before, and I don't know if you heard a bit about the situation in Mali. The security situation is getting worse. And I thought that everything I learned there as head of development cooperation, I could also take with me to the complex situation in Juba. So when I arrived in Juba, I found out how unique the Netherlands is actually there. There are only 3 European countries that have a full-fledged ambassador in Juba. It's France, Germany, and the Netherlands. In the whole diplomatic corps, so from all the ambassadors there are only 2 female ambassadors. It's my Norwegian colleague, Lincoln, and me. And that, I think, gives a very special responsibility to us. It is a unique opportunity to be heard, but it is also a responsibility to tell it in Juba. And we all have a role to play for peace. Now this forum here is about innovative ways, if I had read it well, the HagueTalks, innovative ways to reach peace. But sometimes you have to use traditional instruments in an innovative way. And I think and truly believe that diplomacy is an important instrument that needs to be used in an innovative way. The Netherlands has many instruments. Humanitarian assistance, we have development cooperation, and we also try to be innovative with the instruments that we have. We work on food security, we work on water, on rule of law. But we try, and listening to the ladies that spoke before me, to try to do that in an innovative way, to cater for the needs of the young people of South Sudan, to think of climate change, how do we incorporate that? But also to bring the humanitarian world and the developing world together. Because indeed, humanitarian assistance is so important for the people that I met there in Abidjan, but for the future, people want to have to not worry about the next meal that they have at the table. But as I said, personally, as an ambassador there, I have to use also a diplomatic tool. What do diplomats do? I use the symbol of building bridges, of creating trust and building bridges. Now in South Sudan, in Juba, the first bridge over the River Nile was built by the Netherlands almost 50 years ago. And I use that as a metaphor. Am I innovative in my diplomatic way? I don't know. But I think it is very important to listen and not do the traditional way of going to the government and tell them, okay, you should do this or you should do that. I do believe we do need to engage. I personally make it my mission to talk to other African countries, the neighbors, the African Union. They know more about South Sudan and they do have an interest in peace. So, to cut a long story short, my contribution to peace in South Sudan is to listen and to tell it in Juba. Thank you.
Yesterday I had the privilege of listening to an interview with you which was conducted in Frisian, a language I do not speak. You were speaking in Frisian with 2 of your colleagues in Mali and you were, if I understood it correctly, talking about what you as Frisians bring to the Malinesian context. I was wondering, and you spoke, I think, in the interview being very practically oriented, that this is what you would do so well. I was wondering what of your personal identity you bring to your role in South Sudan. How do you see that you as a Frisian, as a woman, as a Dutch person, contribute some of that identity to the role of the ambassador in that context?
That is a nice question, Benjamin. I think coming from a region, to have a regional perspective, far from the center of power, but also knowing the center of power, I think I can relate very well to the people of South Sudan, to their day-to-day realities. It's not normal to have a government to take care of them. Now, I won't say that is the case in Friesland, but I know people rely much more in the region on each other. They really have to have their systems. And I think that is something in development cooperation or in cooperation has really helped me a lot to understand how to work with people.
Thanks very much, Marielle. I'm actually going to ask you to stay here because we're ready to start the Q&A. I'm going to ask my supporters to bring in the chairs for the Q&A discussion at the moment. I'm going to invite back Grace and Sarah also to the center stage as we prepare ourselves for some lively interaction with the audience. I will cue you up in the speakers order, so Grace and Sarah, you can sit in this specific order. And I'm going to look around the room and we will start preparing some questions. I remind also the people who are joining us online today that you have the opportunity to contribute your questions in the chat box. We continue to encourage your active engagement also with us at #HagueTalks or @HagueTalks on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and other places where you can find us. And as soon as we're ready to start the Q&A. Since we have the privilege of being here at the university, I'm going to start with some questions from young people. So I'm going to look around the room, see if there are any hands. And I'm going to ask my hand supporter if we can share the microphone, because we have two, one with the audience and one with the speakers. And sorry, Sarah, apologies. I see the first question just over here from the gentleman. If you could please maybe introduce yourself and then the question and also explain who
Is it working?
Yes, it is working. And we will share this microphone. Over to you.
My name is Osama Shekho. I'm a student at this university. And I have a good question for the speakers. I was wondering, does Netherlands take much broader role in the South Sudan? So it's not only focusing on details, for example, food security or other details of what the mental health of refugees, but take much broader concept like to create a brand based on values that people believe in, to make meditation between different political entities, or to make like to build a peace and this kind of. Are there such an organization that people believe in and working on peace building in South Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much, Marianne. Over to you. How broad is the Dutch cooperation spectrum?
Well, we do focus on specific themes, but at the same time with many partners. So what you mentioned, we absolutely work on women, peace and security, peace building, but we don't do it all as a government ourselves. So we really, we have a big NGO world here in the Netherlands, but also in South Sudan that we link up to. And that makes it much broader. And it is also not let's say supply driven. It's not like what we think. It is also demand, like what the people want and what the people need. So I hope that answers your question.
So broad, based on the needs of the people, strong interactions between governments, actors, human movements, civil society. Thanks, Marianne. Looking around other hands in the room, I see a couple of hands there. The lady in the jacket.
Thank you. My name is Agita, and I believe that the most sustainable change is brought by a constructive change by the society itself. Therefore, my question concerns what is the practical role of the international community, because I believe that that sustainability of that development of South Sudanese society should uprise from people, from civil society that already exists. So what exactly international community should do? And I would like to present this question for the first speaker. I'm not sure about the name, so sorry.
I think you make a point in terms of the need for us to partner with communities for their own change. And that's where we have as a principle accountability to affected populations. Making sure that in that accountability to affected populations, that their voices are heard, that their own desires and their own vision for their own development is taken into consideration, and that we work with them from that perspective. And this is something that, in fact, for 2023 is a priority in terms of accountability to affected populations. And also, we have many actions across the country, such as Power of Voices, which is a Dutch NGO-led initiative. But there are different actors around the country who work on the issue of community voices, community participation, and ensuring that we respond. In fact, Grace just shared her NGO response to community requests. And more, that's how we work. That's how we work as the youth. In terms of our analysis of the context of the situation, in terms of how we then plan to respond to it, is based on that analysis that involves the voices of the people as well. But oftentimes, those who are most affected cannot take responsibility for fully achieving the results of the change in their communities or their households. They need support, and that's where the international community comes in to provide that support in a way that they will. Not perfect, but trying perfectly to make sure we get it right.
Grace, maybe I can ask you to comment on this. Accountability to affected populations is this technical, technocratic term we hear about including people in the way that we work, right? How do you feel that goes in South Sudan, and do you have any recommendations or things that you think people could take up in how to do that better?
Question, the first thing she asked was the role of the international community, and I'm so happy how Sarah answered it as support. Often it's very obvious that the solution towards our problems will come from us as South Sudanese, and the role the international community can play is support in terms of resources, in terms of mediation, acting as a mediator between the two parties that are having conflict. But you mentioned how accountability towards South Sudanese exists. In civil society, we work in consortiums where we divide roles and locations as well, and a lot of research towards different conflicts. As much as South Sudan feels like one country, you'd find that conflicts in Malakal are different from conflicts in Jonglei. In different states, one state faces conflicts with issues with floods. Like my state is all flooded. And so in there, the programs would be developed towards breastfeed for the IDPs, finding medication, and even finding solutions to the floods. And then in Malakal, we have community violence. In ABA, we have the issue of ABA being a state that is not a Sudan or South Sudan. So I think our role is providing that context, especially to the international and NGOs, because we experience it ourselves, and often even human rights issues, because as a South Sudanese, I often can't speak about things that I see myself, because I just might disappear the next day. So we see activists getting arrested, journalists getting arrested, media houses being shut down. So often, as an international community, they can speak up, and they have the protection of the UN, they have the protection of their here on diplomatic basis, unlike the South Sudanese. So even speaking for the common South Sudanese who would be falsely accused, arrested, or even killed because of speaking against the government or the political parties, and that role really relies on the international community. But our role, apart from implementing the process ourselves, working in the context, I think we both play an important role. One very much needs the other.
So it's a complementary partnership, almost, if I summarized that correctly. Looking around the room again to see if we can pass over the mic to someone else with questions. I've seen some hands earlier over there, I've seen some hands also up here. We'll move over there.
Thank you. My name is Christina Beltis. First, thank you so much for such inspiring talks, and also for really adding your personal note to it. I have a question, maybe more for Grace and for Sarah, about how do you see that young women, like regardless the everyday the daily risks and existential also crisis, but is there a drive and energy to change their role in society and to be more engaged in political participation and to be really drive of this change in more patriarchal and traditional society? So how do you perceive that?
So in our new peace agreement, we have 35% affirmative actions for women participation, and we also have 25% affirmative action for youth participation. And in civil society, we see how the two conflict and leave young women out. So young women do not fall in the women quarter because they will be called youth, and often do not fall in the youth quarter because youth is traditionally translated to young men. And and even women themselves, because of not having many, I would say, mentors, many young women who they can look up to, it's a challenging fact. We see growth in child marriages, forced marriages among young women, high rates of young women leaving school at an early age, and even as civil society, making sure that young women are agenda by themselves is very important, where programs that are developed specifically for young women towards education, mental health, sexual and reproductive health, programs to provide mentors for young women, and even highlighting the women that because of the 35%, we see more, but not enough, women representation in political parties, and just providing space for young women to serve. But I think education plays a very big role, and not just an enrollment, but even keeping girls in schools. We have programs that provide school fees and tuition fees to ladies, programs within the school extracurricular that help provide mental health and extracurricular activities to help young women, move from the patriarchal societies and want to seek an education as a way to improve their lives. So it's a growing process, but I would say education really plays a big role towards it.
So if I summarize that, the young women are definitely there, but we need to look also at the barriers that they face to that participation. Sarah, would you like to comment on that?
I think I would only add that I have met young women who are motivated for that change, who feel that if they don't participate in something that leads to that change, then they miss opportunity. So as much as you see many who are in dire straits and many who sometimes lose hope, you have equally as many who have hope and want to do something about it, like that phrase here today. But also I think an important moment to mark is what we're doing now, February 13 to 15, is the International Women's Transformational Leadership Conference in South Sudan. First ever, and I'm proud to be the one who conceptualized that and got the buy-in from the government for us to do that. Because this is an opportunity for us to be able to show young South Sudanese women that other women on the continent have gone through some of the things they've been through, they've overcome, and they've been phenomenal leaders on the continent and globally, and that they too must take their place in South Sudan, yea, the world. And we're going to be bringing voices from all 10 states of South Sudan to Juba to have an interaction with leaders like President El Sharif, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, other African leaders, executive directors of UN entities, really strong women who have played a phenomenal role for change on the continent, coming to South Sudan to lift South Sudanese women, to say to South Sudanese women, you can do it, and you need to do it, and you need to take your place at the table. And with the next 2 years that we have, how do we prepare women for participation and leadership across all spectrum, and make sure that young women have hope, and young women see that they can do it, and get that views from other women. And I'm glad to see that the Netherlands, you're part of that support system. Thank you, Pastor Shippers, for the support you've been providing in every way, especially encouraging encouraging and all of us who are working on this and making sure that even from the Dutch government perspective, we get that level of support that shows the people of South Sudan, the women of South Sudan, the people of the Netherlands are with them. So this is huge in terms of motivation, but it's not enough. What is needed is concrete actions after that, recommendations that can be actionable, action at the local level, where we can empower young women like Grace and others to then take those recommendations forward and have tangible results for the people we're to serve.
I think we will be following closely, Sarah, as you organize this. Is it the 13th to the 15th of February this year? We'll see a bunch of leaders from across the world come to South Sudan. Greatly looking forward to it. Looking around the room again, I remember you had a question and you've been up for a long time. Or shall we move on to someone else and come back to you? Or
Sure.
yeah, I've got to walk to you now. Yeah, great.
One of the question I got off the original story. Hi, my name is Nyanti. I remember reading somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, that South Sudan is a really diverse country where over 60, 70 languages are spoken and a lot of different cultures. How does that impact, I think all of three of you impacts it, but how does it impact your line of work? Having to maybe deal or be flexible with all those different languages, cultures. How do you deal with those things? Well, whoever wants to answer, I don't know.
Thank you. South Sudan has 64 tribes, and again, very diverse in terms of traditions. We also share a lot of similarities, and before our independence, we had one war. It was to gain independence and become a country. And then after our independence, we started tribal wars amongst ourselves because of the differences within us. And till today, community violence is based on differences in the communities. And like we keep cattle a lot, and cattle is a big issue in violence, since cattle raiding has been there for centuries and getting worse with the economic situation, where communities go to the next community to raid and get cattle and come back with it and kill people in the process. And even efforts towards community reconciliation are really part of the peace agreement, where negotiations between communities that have been warring for a very long time. And as civil society, often we want the communities to bring the solutions for themselves. It's hard for us to come up with solutions for them and enforce it to them. It just becomes another project. But when it's efforts towards bringing the communities and working towards them between themselves, like in this case of cattle raiding, it's an economic situation because these young people who have nothing else except they know how to keep cattle, they don't have any other skills, they don't have access to, they're not educated, they can't find jobs anywhere, and the only solution they think of is raiding cattle as a source of wealth. So then, as a civil society, after listening to the context, we would come up with a solution that's specific for that community. So business opportunities for them, skills, and even looking into investing in cattle, so dairy farming as a source of income, looking into diversifying the economics, so encouraging them to do more. Culture, I think the Dutch has a project on seed project, so providing better seeds for agriculture that can deal with the climate situation at the time, so a specific solution for a specific community.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It comes back to listening again. I think one of the big topics we discussed here. Looking around the room again, are there some questions on this side maybe? Yeah, I see you in the back.
Thank you. My name is Nyanti, and I just wanted to ask, in general, what can fellow African countries do in the form of the African Union, and also, maybe this can be for Grace, fellow African youth, what can we do to support and to help? Because I think as Africans, we think we have a better understanding in some instances, because a lot of African countries are also going through similar things, but how can African youth also play a big part in helping each other the same way that our parents did when they were trying to gain independence as well? We've helped each other before, how can we do that now?
I think this is element of critical series with the youth support, but it's important. I think the question you asked is a very important question. And so I engage the African Diplomatic Corps directly. I do have regular briefings to the African Diplomatic Corps, which is chaired by the ambassador of the EU, and convened at the African Union office. I give them briefings on the humanitarian operation, I give them briefings on the development partnership, including this upcoming conference, briefing them on that and getting their support to mobilize participation and ensure that it's owned by the African states. There's something else I think that I should mention here, which actually goes back to the first question we received on the broader agenda on mediation and so forth. So I just wanted to make sure I don't leave the space without mentioning the collective action, collective leadership around humanitarian diplomacy, because I think it's a very important piece in terms of peace and justice. And where we have obstruction or where we have obstacles to humanitarian access and humanitarian action, we do have a role that the international community has played, with the Netherlands has been a strong part of that, but also the African Diplomatic Corps has been a part of that as well, with other missions, in ensuring that we have a harmonized approach to humanitarian diplomacy and making sure that we work together on the messaging around humanitarian bottlenecks and obstructions, and how we collectively work to engage with the different elements of government to remove those bottlenecks and those barriers. And it's been successful in 2022, and I think it's important to acknowledge the role of the Netherlands in that effort, and acknowledge the fact that it is a form of mediation to ensure access, continued unobstructed humanitarian access, unfettered access to the populations we serve. It continues to be an approach, but it requires everyone, including the diplomatic corps, who may have different levers that they can use in terms of investment.
There's this phrase, right, African solutions for African problems, which I think ties into lots of things that you're saying at the moment. Grace, would you be open to reflecting a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, sure. I would like to start with what African countries have actually already done for South Sudan. During now, countries like Uganda, Kenya, I was born in Kenya as a refugee, host refugees from South Sudan. We've also, even during our civil war, countries like Ethiopia actually fought in our army. And we see our peace agreement now was signed in Addis Ababa with support from IGAD and the African Union. So they have already played a huge role in, as a mediator to a point they even fought in the actual wars for South Sudan. And continuing to how young people provide, African youth provide support for youth from South Sudan. South Sudan is a member of even the East African community. We are a member of IGAD, and of course the African Union. In the East African community, we have the East African, even in the African Union, we have the African Free Trade Area, in which South Sudan is now supposed to join. And Africa provides the market for South Sudan for some of our resources. We are great producers of shea butter, fish, and that providing a niche for us in South Sudan. So the regional trade has a huge opportunity for us. And even some of our young people were trained in Tanzania to get the skills that they would apply back home, and the exchange between young people in knowledge and in business and politics. And even African countries have also played as a host to some of the activists that had to flee because of being a victim of speaking against the regime. And I think the support of the African Solution for African Problems, we learn from countries like Rwanda on how they dealt with the genocide and how dealing with tribal conflicts. And it provides us a background, because most of the time South Sudan sometimes the tribal wars are compared to Rwanda, and work to run the deed as sensitize the community, try to remove the idea of tribes and dividing, and we apply that home. So I first very much appreciate what African countries have.
I know you've made a big priority for yourself, focusing on engaging African countries, so maybe you can share some
Yeah, I
thoughts.
think it's a very good point. And as I was saying, to contribute to peace in the Netherlands, we don't need to do it ourselves. It has to get across to the South Sudanese government. And indeed, I've been listening to the neighbors, partners, but also very concrete in programs. We have a program with the UNDP, and it's on peace building and reconciliation. So we finance that, but they go to South Africa to see what they've done to peace building and reconciliation. So it is really tapping also for us in our programs and in our dialogue, tapping into this information of what the neighbors, what they're best at, what they're most concerned about, and they're really better listened to than to us. So sometimes I cannot go and speak about a thing, but I know my Kenyan colleagues can. And I think for the Netherlands, we have a good position diplomatically also, because we are not a threat to anyone in the area. We're not a big power, we don't have big business interests. We've been there ever since its independence, supporting South Sudan, and also the neighbors, the other African countries see that. So we liaise and we really work together. And I think it's really, really important, because it's not something the EU can do, or the Western powers in East Africa and in South Sudan. It's not possible. We really have to work with our African partners.
Thanks, Rhea. I'd like to turn our attention to the audience online. There are some questions coming in before we return back to the room. I'm going to hand over the microphone to the audience.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions from one of the persons that watched this stream. So thank you for the questions. They are by Breektutur Geerling. And the questions are for Ms. Nyanti and Ms. Schippers, especially. And the first question goes, how in your roles do you support the localization agenda in South Sudan? And then the follow-up question, what do you see as the next critical steps that the international community can and should take to drive the localization agenda further?
And maybe in the reply you can also briefly explain the concept of localization, if that's just for the audience. Should I give it to you, Sarah? Yeah?
So in the work we do, that's largely led by the United Nations system and international NGOs, there has been an agreement, which is called a grand bargain, that we will have a minimum 25% going to local organizations in the countries where we serve. And it's important in terms of capacity building, it's important in terms of knowledge sharing and building resilience for the local communities where we serve. And for the localization agenda in 2022, what I've been able to do is prioritize target setting for local NGOs and also provide capacity building for local NGOs to build their systems. In addition to that, giving an incentive to international NGOs to partner with more local NGOs in terms of delivering of their projects. The last thing I was able to push before the end of the year was then having a reserve allocation and a humanitarian fund for local organizations that want to work on their risk management systems in prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. For those local NGOs that are in hard to reach areas where nobody else can go, providing a window of funding for them to be able to access. That's not all that needs to be done. A lot more needs to be done, because localization is not about the big South Sudanese NGOs. It's not about those who already have agency of voice. It's about those local solutions in pockets of South Sudan where they're not organized into an organization or an NGO or a community-based organization. You have individuals, you have women, you have youth with ideas, with local solutions, and how do we get them closer to access resources to make those tangible ideas, those innovative ideas, a reality. So there's a lot more we need to be doing, and that's something we're focusing on for 2023 as well. I think it's important to note here that the localization agenda is often one that's talked about in terms of money. How do we get more money and enhance the local NGOs? But I think we should always look at it in terms of knowledge, skills, capacity, and building resilience. And then look at what the cost of doing business to get that done is. Because if we always put money first, it totally changes the tone of what localization should really be about. It's really to be about empowering those who are in need to become actors themselves to be able to solve problems locally.
Marianne, would you like to add to that?
Not much to add, but it is indeed also a buzzword, I would say. Localization just came in recently, and now it's all about localization. And for people that are not in the development jargon, you would think, well, that's logic. Why not? You have to work for the people, through the people on the ground that are affected. So. But the difficulty is that local organizations don't have the structures usually that we require for their their accountability. So it is easy to work with well-known INGOs, international NGOs, or well-known structures that know our language, they know how to make a project proposal. So we have to really make an effort because it is said to us by politicians, of course you have to localize, you have to do that. But we have to put it back like, okay, are you willing to take a risk that something goes wrong? That they maybe don't have the financial statements just drawn up as you like it. And I think this is very important. Localization, yes, but we as providers of support, we need to be able to take risks. Now, one thing I would like to say is that, again, the Netherlands, I think because how we are organized, we have a very good NGO community that already works a lot with local partners. It's a little bit how we work. And so we really can help them. We have to use it, certainly in South Sudan, the good examples to build on that. So this is what I can say, and you can hold us account to that. If you hear things that say, yeah, but that is a good local organization, we need to find them, we need to see how they can tap into our system, our work, our joint efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to go to you in a second, and then I'll just explain the rest of the rules of procedure. What we're going to do is we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to give all of the panelists 1 minute to share some reflections at the end per person. And I invite you also really to reflect personally on some of the things that you heard today and some of the things that you want to take into the future. And then I also encourage everyone, especially to continue the conversation with us online, but also at the bar over there where we hope to see you for a drink and a quick bite afterwards. So definitely don't feel like this is your final opportunity to ask the speakers anything. Going to pass over the microphone to you, and then we will hear from all of the speakers for their final reflections, and then I'll say some words of thank you.
Thank you. Savage was very excited about this conversation tonight, and reflecting on what I guess all of you said in some ways is that we live in a context in which almost it's a concept how we need to do things differently, and for me that's kind of the trend of that conversation. But liberal peace ideas are critiqued, triple nexus is becoming buzz, neoliberal capitalism system in which we live is also questioned there. They say local economic extractive industry. And so for me, maybe the question for all of you from different angles is what differently would mean in the sense how we do, for instance, peace, development, humanitarian differently. Are actors in South Sudan on board, try to understand triple access, what collaboration means, or how Marianne, I'd be curious how diplomacy would be differently done from feminist foreign policy angle. Introduction to this event, there was mention of you being advocate of feminist foreign policy. So that angle, what diplomacy could be differently, and then maybe raise that resilience. And what resilience would be differently than middle-aged white person bringing you some competencies they believe are you need. But how resilience from within comes from communities. So reflections on what the different means and how we can be creative maybe to wrap up.
Thank you for the question. I think I'll just use that as the segue to the final words. Different. First of all, first different is the fact that globally we hear about the nexus and we hear about the humanitarian development peace nexus. Different for South Sudan is what I've coined as the PhD nexus, peace humanitarian development, and we've reworded everything in our local programming tools to reflect that. So it's a partnership for peace, resilience, and recovery to address the peace humanitarian development nexus, and we have concretely identified 3 areas for that work. And it's not just about the buzzword or the language around it, it's about the concrete projects we're designing in particular areas. We just finished the conflict analysis to look at where we can implement some of the nexus projects as proof of principle on the peace humanitarian development nexus, with peace in the forefront, peace at the center, and making sure that peace is the prerequisite and precursor for everything else in terms of humanitarian development. It's about the issue of reducing the flags and the silos, but actually joint up analysis, joint information sharing, joint identification of the problem, joint solutions, joint analysis of who's best placed to do what in the response, joint monitoring, joint reporting, where attribution is not the focus of the day, but the results achieved for the people is the focus. And it's a tough one. But we do have actors already at the table who are putting their money where their mouth is, like the Netherlands. We do have actors like Norway, we have Canada and others who are ready and on board. But we have NGOs, we have IFIs, we have the UN humanitarian development and peace domains. So we look forward to coming back sometime and seeing the results we achieved as a result of this, and the collective results. And we have even a broader representation in terms of the different constituents that are members of the Triple Nexus working in South Sudan. In closing, I would say the best job we can do in South Sudan and anywhere we work, the best job that we can do is to work ourselves out of a job. When we've worked ourselves out of a job, we've succeeded.
Thank you. I think whenever we say we want to do things different, we have to first figure out where we went wrong in the first place. And often, if all we do is come up with a different idea, and without a learning process from where we went wrong in the first place, we end up doing the same mistakes of not letting the solutions come up by themselves from the people, from within the context. So even in learning programs, when developing these programs, and leaving room for innovation and risk as well. So if you're not willing to take, often even in the NGO culture, you often can't change. You can't change the policy. Sometimes funding comes in the name of sexual reproductive health, and the UN organization wants you to do a project on that specifically. So even you who wants to come up with a new idea, which you know is a solution, you cannot get creative by yourself. So leaving that room for South Sudanese to develop their own programs, and not specifically what meets the funders' need or the funders' objectives, is often, and I love that they have 25%, which is for localization, which is another issue. And I think the ambassador mentioned how working with local NGOs, there's an idea that maybe they can't write financial reports better, and then she gave a solution: capacity building for local NGOs and providing them with skills in which they will be able to meet the requirements of a funding partner. So I guess if we want to do things differently, accepting that we went wrong in the first place, and trying to listen and let the solutions, often the solutions are right in front of us if we just listen and look for them. Yeah.
Thanks, Grace. Marianne, over to you.
Well, I think the most important thing that I need to do differently, or we need to do differently from a diplomatic perspective, is to not lose hope and to really keep on pushing. I think after the independence, the international community and the diplomatic community also thought that South Sudan could be, fixed, and leadership is not where we would like to see it today. And then you can do two things. You say, okay, we have nice programs, and I go in my office and I speak to the UN system, to the population, and we do good things that have results in themselves, but we give up, pushing the government and trying to use all the diplomatic tools that we have to really change also the government and the perspective, how they take care of their own population. I think this is an obligation that we have. It doesn't sound like rocket science, but it does need a lot of you must not be discouraged. And I think this is the most important thing, for us to keep on going. Thank you.
A big round of applause for Marianne Sievers. As a host, it is my pleasure to wrap up this discussion today. I will not try to summarize it because I think there's far too much said that I could simplify in a few minutes for you. What I can do is thank the speakers very gracefully for their time and stories that they shared with us today. I want to thank you and the audience for the time that you took to be here, to listen, to engage with us, and also thank everyone who joined us from online, the questions that you shared, the comments that you shared with us on Twitter. We're very happy that you took the time to discuss South Sudan with us today. It's a big privilege, and thanks to the Hague University for Applied Sciences for hosting us today, for our partners that's contributed to these discussions, and finally also for everyone who worked on the organization. It was a big pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you will join us in the bar for reflections on what we heard today. There's some drinks set up for you, some snacks and bites. Thank you so much for your time, and hope to see you next time for another HagueTalks. Have a good evening.